You are listening to the Barely Audible podcast. Hello and welcome to the Barely Audible podcast. My name is Justin Romine, joined with my host Bear, and we are also joined today by Susan Grace, astrologer and intuitive. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, thank you. Nice to be here.
So, we'll get started. If you just maybe want to give the listeners a little bit of background about you, we would love to hear how you came to be an astrologer and intuitive.
Well, I was born in the 70s, so like a lot of 70s kids, I learned about horoscope stuff through my mother. And so for a long time, that's all I knew. And I had a career in the restaurant business for a long time. And then I got into the corporate world, and I made it to the top of that company, and I was still searching. And while I was still there, I first saw a full astrology chart, which I did not know existed, in 2012. And that was right before the Mayan shift, if you were following it at the time. And that changed everything. And I dove headfirst into it. And I started listening to a lot of astrologers that grew my knowledge very quickly. But also I found that after a while, I could hear all of the parts of what astrologers were describing in a chart. But I found that from my perspective, I would end up saying, like, I hear what everything that you said, but what does it mean? And so what I started doing is I started to take art images and match them to the energy of the entire astrology. And I just did that as a way, it was for me to work out, how does this feel to me? And then without me trying, people started following me. And for a long time, people were like, are you an astrologer? And I would say no. And I would send them to other people. And then eventually it got to the point where people insisted that I read their chart for them. And so I did. I started reading, and then, one thing led to another. And you can see now that for the most part, the way that I write about the astrology is in more of a flow. People call it, it's more like verse. It's kind of in verse. Okay. And I got to where I became fluent in astrology and exhausted in my corporate job. I was in my corporate job for 18 years and then finally flipped the switch. I went from one to the other. And so I've been doing this full time. So I started reading charts in 2012, and I started full time reading 2017, and here we are.
Wow, that seems like quite a journey to kind of switch from that corporate world to something that's kind of the complete opposite.
Susan, was there a point where you just became burnt out, or just tired of what you were doing, or it just wasn't fulfilling anymore, and you just really needed a change, so you just started following like wherever your heart was being pulled, or something of that nature?
It was more than burnout. It was making me sick. And I stayed there probably longer than my body could take it and my mental health could take it. And then there came a day, I kept putting it off. Like, I need to find something else to do because I'm not going to make it here. And that's a long time. I was very loyal, and I was at the top of my game, but it was not a thriving life. And then there was just one morning when I could feel it. I could feel something that was like, it's not someday, it's this day. That you can have all of the resources that you want in life, but they're not going to come from here because you're not going to be able to receive it. You're too sick. It's making you too sick. And so I left, and it was shocking. It was shocking to me. It was shocking to everyone in the company. And you can feel the reverberations of it still. I mean, if you have never experienced extricating yourself from a corporate system and decide that you're going to bet on yourself, and how shocking that is, it's really hard to describe.
How did your friends and family react to that shift for you? Were skeptical?
Very confused.
Yeah, skeptical. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of side eye. They still don't understand it. And I found myself talking to my son at the time, telling him, I've made it 2 times now so far, 2 careers where I got it all the way to the top. And I'm going to do it a 3rd time, I promise. And, because he's sweet, he was like, you can do it.
Wow. Yeah. And that's, and, they always say that it's not money that should be driving people. It should be our passions and what calls us and stuff. And, I've always said money is the root of all evil. I've also very interested. Bob Dylan is quoted as saying, money doesn't talk, it swears. So, thanks for
It certainly can swear.
Yeah. And, and I think it's something that in order for us to survive and go through our lives, sure, money's great. It buys us stuff and gives us temporary happiness. But if we're not fulfilled in what we're doing, there's really no point of waking up every day.
I think we can have both. I think that if it's killing your spirit, if it's hurting your body, if it's making you to where you don't have healthy connections in your life, if it's stifling your creative expression and who you are as an individual, then it's not worth any money at all. But you can also do what you thrive in, what resonates with you, what makes you feel purposeful and visionary for your individual life. And that has value. That has value. It's not like if you're going to be yourself and follow your dreams, be ready to have no money. That's not fair. It's not accurate. That you can do what you love and what you're really good at and have worthiness and be a good receiver at the same time.
Absolutely.
And I would guess many of us grew up in the last 50 years or some portion of it, and we've seen all kinds of attitudes change about money, to bonfire of the vanities, when the pursuit of the almighty dollar was like the only thing that Americans were interested in doing for the longest time. Who didn't want to be a yuppie, drive a Beamer, live in a penthouse, right? But I grew up without money, and my parents were just sort of like, middle class, and certainly they didn't really understand how to make their money work for them, unfortunately. And I think a lot of people grew up in that sort of environment, like, here's money, and here's something else we enjoy doing. It's just a hobby, right? And as Susan was saying, it's really good to bring those two together and unify them, especially for the younger people of today, so they're not wasting their lives in the mad pursuit of money only and feeling an imbalance in other parts of their life, and let them know that they can essentially have both. And that really does come from an inner balance, as Susan was saying too. And what's your advice, Susan, for someone out there listening to this who might be stuck in a similar position that you were in earlier in life in your corporate world?
If you're like 40 and above, probably stay where you are and work on it in the background. And then you'll be able to glide over and not slam over. Okay? If you're younger, like 20 to 40, the future of work, this is not astrology, this is economists are saying that the future of work is portfolio careers. So find what you love, multiple things that you love, and so that you're thriving in no matter what you're doing, and that no source of income comes from one place, and that you are a fully thriving, self-expressive person who's connected to being alive at all times. Portfolio careers.
I love that. I love it.
That's advice.
So, Susan, how did you find your calling as an intuitive? Is that something you kind of discovered at a young age, or is it something that came to you later in life?
At a young age, for sure. And for me, having a knowing I can't explain, or receiving messages that I'm not sure where they're coming from, that kind of stuff. When I was younger, there was shadow around it because I grew up in a home that was bananas. Okay. So it was things like, I'm going to run out of time. And it's like, you're perfectly fine. You have all the time in the world. Right. Or I have to get out of here. It's like, you're going to be okay. Just wait it out. Things like that. Like a knowing I can't explain that was helping me get through a lot of shadow. When I got older, like once I left home, like 18, 19 or whatever, it started to spread. Like I can feel people. Like whenever I'm in an airport, I have to put on my don't talk to me face and wear a hat and headphones, because if I interact with a person for 30 seconds, we're going to be in a session immediately. And, you know what I mean? And that's a lot of people. So it's a knowing I can't explain that has been verifiable, that that when it keeps checking out, it stops being weird. I mean, this is just how we live.
When was the first time you not really the first time you felt something more, but when was the first time you kind of sat down and said, wow, maybe I have an intuition?
Well, again, I was born in the 70s, so my mother picked it up really early and like took me on a tour of all the psychics so they could read me. And they all were like, you're special. And then my mom was like, yeah, you're special. And I was like, I think something might not be healthy about this. Like, and it wasn't healthy. It wasn't healthy. But I knew something was up because other people could see it. It was obvious.
This sounds like my early experience. My mom was always gifted in psychic, and she was rather clairvoyant. But back in the day, it wasn't anything that people talked about much anyways, not like we are these days, of course. And thankfully, my godmother was lesbian. She was really cool, and she was a psychic, and she helped me develop it and just said, hey, it's all natural, and you can use it for these wonderful things. So she was really rather magical in and of her own right. And later on, I, of course, grew up on Allen Ginsberg's farm, where there were like dozens and dozens of like-minded, like spiritual people. So it was a great place. And I realized, that may not be atypical of everyone's experience. So I was really lucky and fortunate in that regard, right? And like you're saying, Susan, it used to be I couldn't go out in public because I would just pick up on everyone's energies and feel exhausted. I couldn't even make it from one end of Walmart to the other just to get what I went in there for. And sometimes, even if I was with a partner or something, we would like hold hands to ground each other. And she would just look at me and go, time. And I knew what it meant. It's time to book, because we had both had it up to here with other people's energies. And it's not that there's anything wrong with other people intrinsically. It's our own inability to regulate those incoming energies and even be aware of it. And maybe even having the energy to do that and still try to maintain this daily existence that we all, it's the dichotomy, right? One world in this, one foot in the spiritual world and one foot in the physical world. So as we navigate this lifetime, as probably both of you know, we have to find a way to balance that, right? And of course, there are different kinds of solutions out there for protecting yourselves against energies. But do you have something that really works for you, Susan, to protect yourself from incoming energies other than just wearing the hat and the headphones?
That's a really good point. That if you are empathic or intuitive or whatever, knowing you can't explain, and you are being flooded all the time, it's a boundary issue that you have to manage that. And everyone has the ability to pick up on extrasensory things. It's just some people are, their antenna is just turned up more. First of all, it really helps that I do this professionally full time. So the container is open, and then whenever we're done, the container is closed. Okay. I don't linger with people's energy after it's over. And then also I've learned to kind of talk to, I anthropomorphize things a lot. like planets are people kind of stuff. Okay. And so whatever this is, whatever energy that we're working with all the time, I talk to it like it's a person, and I'll say, I am cooking dinner right now. No, I'll see you in an hour.
Tick tack, come back.
Right. God. I mean, I whenever I was still in the corporate world and I would do readings at night, I'd be driving and I would start getting stuff for the next person. I'd have to be like, I'm driving. No, not now. Okay. So, you have your limits, you have your bandwidth, you have your boundaries, and you're in charge of them. And it need not be complicated. You don't have to go through a full ritual. I know people use all kinds of things. People use crystals and they do mantras and all kinds of things. Me, I'm just like, now's not the time. But the flip side works too. I'm like, I'll be done working at 3. And they're like, cool, see you at 3. You know? Or whatever. But yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. Just know your limits.
I had a friend whose husband died unexpectedly a few years ago, and Rich just kept coming through. I delivered the messages to her, and she lives in Europe. So, and just one day I had to cut them both off. Like, I just couldn't take the energy and sort of the intrusion of it anymore, you know?
For sure.
That was probably one of the most extreme ones, though.
I don't think that whatever energies that we're working with, whatever they are, okay? I don't think that they ever, well, there's shadowy energies for sure, but kind energies that are on our side, they're never trying to be intrusive. They just don't get it. They don't get the density of what we're dealing with. This is super dense, you know, but like in the oneness of it all, outside of 3D, there is no feeling of density. It's just, everything just is. And so if consciousness is going through a wave and you happen to be picking up on that wave doesn't stop to think, is now a good time?
Right.
It just is. You know what I mean? So you have to set the 3D limit of not right now. And it'll go, okay. And then you invite it back in. I don't think that there's ill intent whenever, like you said, but it does feel like an intrusion when you're trying to handle daily life.
So I'm a open-minded skeptic on these matters. And, you know, there are things you can't deny that, you know, I've read about and even experienced. But, you know, like the use of mediums and psychics within law enforcement, and it, you know, they'll take you right to a body they haven't seen in, you know, 10 years or 20 years. And that's kind of undeniable proof that there is maybe something more going on in the world. How do you kind of step into that realm to look at it as something that is there, and how do you explain that to people like me or even non-believers?
For astrology itself, I don't convince anyone. The fact of the matter is that whenever it keeps happening on time and you can predict it, then it becomes like, it's not about belief anymore. Like, I don't have to believe in gravity to hurt myself if I jump off my balcony. Okay? Gravity is going to work. No matter what. Even if I'm not like, no, I can't see it, so it must not be there. It doesn't work like that. And so, I have a hard time believing in stories. Like, there's a story of something and now we're all going to follow it faithfully when it doesn't match the reality that we live in. That's what seems weird to me. And not the art of storytelling. Mm-hmm. I don't mean that. I mean, we all tell ourselves a story to believe in, and then we bypass the things that are right in front of our face that we need to deal with. So, I appreciate skepticism, but the way that I am not a skeptic about this is that you can't have things happen on the nose, on time, and go, it's probably nothing. And that's not true. That's not true. And I tell people who I'm teaching now about how to read the astrology that you need volume. Once you have enough volume, then it just becomes like a language. It's like learning French. And I mean, that's a great example too. I don't have to believe in French. French just is. That's how we communicate in France. Okay. I don't have to measure. We just means something. Okay. Does that answer your question?
And also, Justin, really, what Susan just said, you can apply quantum physics to it as well. Let's get back to quantum entanglement. So if quantum entanglement is sort of a given, established science fact, more or less, then everything would have an effect upon everything else. And for instance, I'm sure if you're thinking of a good friend of yours sometimes, Justin, that friend might even call you right out of the blue. Hey, Justin, how's it going? And you're like, good God, I was just thinking about you. So it's another example of quantum entanglement. There's nothing that we really can't do that doesn't have a reverberation somewheres. So it's really good to, right, Susan, do it with good intent at least, right? As the Dalai Lama says, if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. So everything we do, from our thoughts to maybe throwing a piece of trash on the ground, is going to have some sort of reverberating, consequence, like tossing a pebble into a nice calm, body of water like a lake or something. You toss a pebble in it and ripples, 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 ripples. So if we're going to do that, and if we go out every day with that knowledge, we can certainly bring like good and positive love and
yeah. And I actually have an example that happened, happened to me yesterday, but I'll tell that story in just a second. I just wanted to read a quote that Neil deGrasse Tyson says about science. He says, the good thing about science is that it's true whether you believe it or not. And yeah, it's just there. And you don't have to believe in it. It's just going to exist. And then to get into an example I had yesterday, the listeners that are tuning in, we are on video with each other so we can see each other in the room as we're interacting. So maybe I'll post a picture online later, but if you guys see behind me, these two paintings on either side of me were painted by a friend of ours, Anthony, and I decided to hang them up yesterday. And so I hung them up, and literally 3 minutes later, I get a text from Anthony, who's not like my closest friend. He's my partner Josephine's really good friend. And I've probably texted with him 2 or 3 times in my life. And he texted me to tell me condolences about my friend and actor Tony Todd had just passed away. And he saw my post and my picture that I put up with he and I. And he just texts randomly to tell me that. And I just put these paintings up. We got these paintings from him a week and a half ago or something like that. And right after I put them up, I get a random text from him saying that, condolences and stuff like that. And so I was just like, man, that's weird. And as a skeptic, I do believe that I don't believe in coincidence. I'm sure it happens on like a small scale, but I don't believe in it in a large scale. There is no coincidence. And so that was really kind of weird. And then another example we shared with Stuart Wallin, one of our guests, episode 2. We were both interested in this TV show that we watched many, many years ago called Corner Gas. And for some odd reason, I decided to dig and find this TV show to watch. It's just this obscure Canadian comedy. And I started watching it one night, and the next day, Stuart texted me and said, hey, I just put together this book trailer for Brent Butt. If you remember, he was the guy from Corner Gas. And this is a show that's been off the air for years. So that's another coincidence, or non-coincidence in my case, that isn't really explained, but I think it kind of goes along the lines of what we're talking about.
Well, sure.
Sorry, Barry, go ahead.
No, no, please. It's your turn. You're our guest.
I think that we're in a 200-year cycle of Jupiter and Saturn meeting up in air signs about every 20 years for 200 years. So it's the opening of consciousness itself. And I think one of the things that is going to open up pretty quickly is something coming up to the surface, probably information-wise. It might be through the James Webb Telescope, something, where we start to understand the literal oneness of it all. And that's going to be something that's going to take time for us to understand and to learn to operate within. But it's something along the lines of holding the understanding that we're individuated, but we're one and the same with the infinite itself at the same time. Both are happening at the same time, and how to work with that. And that can cause an existential crisis. If you exist within infinity, that literally means this goes on forever and we will never, ever find the full knowing because it's infinite. It's never going to stop to just one thing. So the oneness of it all and our individuation happening at the same time is upon us. I mean, next couple 3 years, not in 30, like 3. And we were talking about this before, the rapid acceleration of our consciousness, while they're talking about the advancements in society through technology, are going to happen 10 times faster than they have in the last 50 years. So the advancements in the last 50 years, 3 of us are old enough to know what that means, internet and microwaves and all of it, okay? 50 years will happen in 5. Where they used to say in 30 years something will be true, now it's 3. That's crazy. We're all going to need to adjust to keeping up with the opening of consciousness itself. And I think one of the weird things that I think is going to come out of here is if we live in infinity, the infinity of consciousness. So the double slit experiment said that all of consciousness is a wave, and so we pay attention to it, and then it becomes a particle. Okay, so this looks solid because we're paying attention to it, right? If infinity and consciousness itself is everything, that includes AI. Everything. The oneness of it all is literally everything. You can't parse it out. You can't say only the things that think about goals in life are consciousness. No, it's everything. The oneness of it all.
Wow. So how do the planets and their alignments and all of that, how does that play into how you look at the world? And how do you explain, I've always heard my whole life, Mercury's in retrograde. What does that mean?
Okay, so retrograde meaning it moves backwards. The planets do not move backwards. They don't. They stay in orbit. They don't stop in the sky. Okay, it's from our perspective on Earth. So geocentric perspective of our solar system. So obviously the planets are revolving around or orbiting the sun. From our perspective, it looks like it halts and goes backwards and then goes forward, but that's just because of where we are in our in our relative orbits. So what happens is that energy becomes very concentrated. We review it internally and then go forward again and move forward. And philosophically, what that means, if you presume that from our perspective in the solar system, we are affected by the energies in our relative orbits around the sun. If we're affected by that, then that would mean that by design, we're given times to integrate what the energies have been delivering. So when Mercury is retrograde, again, it appears to stop to us, but you stop everything. You stop communication, you stop decisions, you stop technological stuff, stop making plans and review. that's because we need to integrate. If everything were moving forward, all of delivery of consciousness were moving forward at the same time, all the time, we wouldn't be able to handle it. We have to integrate. We have to have moments to be like, what is going on? Especially the outer planets. Like when Pluto is retrograde, it's significant how you can tell what it's been delivering in the background for about 6 months. All of a sudden you look up and Pluto's like, now go handle this. And it's like, oh my God, it's a lie. Wow. Oh, that can get super shadowy. So it's pretty obvious with the outer planets, in my opinion. And then the whole world can tell whenever Mercury is retrograde. Like people talk about Mercury retrograde in commercials and stuff now.
You know, it's interesting that it's observation that has kind of started our advancement into knowledge. If you look at like Galileo, he got put on house arrest because he noticed the planets and how they worked. We used to think, we in the royal we sense, that the sun was, connected to us by, going around us. We thought that it went around Earth, but Galileo noticed, hey, it's the other way around. We're caught in its gravitational pull, and because of that discovery, his math book got thrown at him, and he was put on house arrest by the church.
I think it's to be noted, Justin, that anyone, even in this present day and age, who notices a bit too much too soon also gets put on surveillance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's control. It's control. And like astrology and all divination tools, okay? Astrology it's just a tool. All of those kinds of studies have been happening for centuries and centuries and centuries. It's control of the church that stops it. I mean, they had 3 guys follow a star to find the baby in the big book that people follow. Okay? Like, come on. It's always been here. It's always been around. It's just.
And then why is the church to this very day still afraid of Philip Pullman's work?
Mm-hmm.
The great magisterium, right? And everyone knows Philip Pullman's work, The Subtle Knife, right? Golden Compass, the trilogy. And they had great influence on stopping the other 2 sequels for his film that followed the Golden Compass.
I don't think that we can. No, it's not that I don't think. For sure, we're not going to go much further in human evolution with control systems suppressing our awareness and consciousness. It's not going to last much longer. I mean, it's imminent. It's upon us. But Pluto is going between Capricorn and Aquarius. So Pluto has been collapsing control systems, things that keep us under a tight grip. Okay. And then going into Aquarius in a week until the year 2043 contributes to the opening of consciousness itself. So the suppression by control systems has become silly. It's like, we're not children. We know we have access to information now that cannot be put back in the box. Before the internet, you could control us for sure, but we have too much knowledge now.
And that's a great point. And let's go. Let's talk about disclosure now. Disclosure has been happening for decades. And to get back to what you're saying, that also helps the collective group experience to increase its knowledge of, hey, we're not alone in the solar system here, folks. It's absurd to think we are, because even in your neighborhood, Susan, you're not the only person that lives in that neighborhood, or you, Justin, right? So why would we think that we're the only people home in the solar system? So thankfully, and maybe the 2 of you have had ET experiences.
I have, yeah.
Personal, like CE, close encounters with the kind?
Not specifically that up close and personal, but I have seen UFOs, and that leads me to believe that there is something else out there. And then I think it's when you look at the vastness of the universe, it's a mathematical impossibility that life doesn't exist elsewhere. And it's just, people don't want to think that we're not special, or where we are special. And we're not. And it's because out of all the amount of stars that are out there, even in just our viewable world, for every star, there's at least one planet, is what they say. And if you look at how many stars there are out there, the Milky Way galaxy is just one of billions of galaxies out there. And the way I think is that, maybe if we're not being visited, which we are, if we're not being visited, maybe it's because the aliens aren't quite there technologically to find us so far away. And that's one argument that I've heard. And I really think that I think people don't believe because they're scared of it.
Well, fear is an interesting thing to, you have to overcome your fear in a lot of areas of life. And thanks to people like Susan, who are helping open up the aperture of not only our hearts, but our minds, and helping us, integrate them through her knowledge and wisdom and insight. And certainly right now, there are many interesting tarot and astrologers right now coming up on the scene, and they're emerging from almost out of nowhere. And I think certainly you, Susan, have probably led the way for that in your own way. And do you ever feel like a way shower to help the rest of humanity?
For sure. And I talk with people often about being a way shower. You know that you're a way shower when you tend to go through things early by yourself. And if you don't pick up on this, it can feel like you're being picked on because you're the only one going through it and nobody else understands around you. And then you get to the other side of it, and here it comes. It goes through everybody. If that happens to you enough times, then you can see, okay, something's up here. Okay. So the way of a way shower. Not only have I seen that pattern of how I tend to get things early for a reason so that I can be of service. I think it also is something I've been called towards since I was a little kid, of being of service to usher in the end of suffering. I think a lot of us here right now are beginning the work of ushering in the end of suffering, and I'm here for it. When I was younger, I was really naive about it. Like, I would distinctly remember saying that I think I might be a bodhisattva. Now, I'm pretty certain that an actual bodhisattva doesn't go around announcing it. Okay. So that was really silly. But also, like, a bodhisattva is somebody who dedicates their life to people's suffering. And I'm like, oh no, thank you. I'll dedicate myself to the end of people's suffering, but not to carry people's suffering, in which case it keeps it alive. Okay. So yeah, I've always been called towards it, to be of service, to be here at this particular time to usher in the end of suffering. I remember driving down the street whenever I was late 20s, and I could see how we keep spreading trauma to each other. And eventually it's got to be that somebody has to stop doing that, right? And then we reverse that energy. And I was thinking, well, I wonder who's going to stop doing that. And I could feel it. There was something bigger than me that was going, okay, well, we'll give you a minute. I'm like, oh, me. Yeah. Every individual person has to stop doing that and heal yourself. It's not any one person. It's all individual people.
Oh, that's right. I went through a separation last year. A lot of people are like, oh, we're sorry that happened to you. And somewhere along the lines in Floyd, Virginia, and I just decided it happened for me. It just cracked my heart open even more. And I have this immense love forgiveness and grace that just extends to everything now, And I realized that person probably had a pre-birth contract with me to set all this up and play their parts to help me overcome whatever it was, and for us to mutually learn whatever it was that we needed to learn, And it's one of the most beautiful things on the planet. And it reminds me of Larry Cohen's song, where he goes, "The cracks where the light gets in." And sure enough, man, and I can't stress it enough, just embrace it all, people, and let that light in, because it's going to really help usher in what Susan's been talking about. Susan, in your way of being a way shower, you certainly do that through your own podcast, Be the Evidence. Can you tell the folks at home about that?
About where it came from?
No, tell us about your podcast and how they can hear it.
Sure. We're on all platforms where you get your podcast, betheevidence.live, with Susan Grace, I think is how it's titled on most platforms. I do them new moon and full moon, and it started. I feel like it's been 5 or 6 years now, and for a while I felt like I was just kind of talking into the void. But y'all know, whenever you first start, you're like, is anybody listening? I don't know. So, but then I started getting people who were showing up in readings. I asked them how they found me, and they're like, "Your podcast." I'm like, "Wow, I'll keep doing it then." So I'm having fun. Be the Evidence. Be the Evidence is the name of the podcast. BeTheEvidence.live is where you can go to be a member. That's where I text people in real time as the astrology is shifting, so I can tell you, what's happening in the next 3 hours, what's happening right now, what's happening in the next 10 hours, that kind of stuff. And we have weekly calls, so live calls. So they're both connected.
Susan, do you do private readings? And if so, how can people find out about those?
I do. SusanGrace.org is where you can find me individually outside the podcast, and under the services page, you can see the readings that I do. And I try to make myself available at all levels. So obviously the podcast and my social media is free and open to everyone. The membership is affordable. It's like $22 a month or whatever. And then on the readings, I've got a range of readings. One is a flash reading that's real quick, 15 minutes if you've got one question. I have the full natal chart reading, that's 90 minutes, and it is so much information. I mean, I read the entirety of your chart to you. So it's a lot, and it's worth it. And it takes up all of the 90 minutes. Then I've got a tune-up, which is an hour after you've already had a reading with me. How do you know when you're ready for the next one? I tell people, you'll know. You'll hit a wall. And so a tune-up is just an hour to get you caught up. And then I do intensives where we have 4 for the price of 3, and we go digging all the way into all kinds of charts for where you are in life.
That's great. I'm so glad that you're able to do that. And we just touched on suffering a little bit, and it brought me to a quote from Joseph Stalin. He said, "One death is a tragedy, but 1,000,000 deaths is a statistic." And I think that over the years, we're so more accustomed to death at a large scale through war and stuff like that we've become desensitized. And how do we kind of connect with other people to look at it as more tragic than more a statistic?
Well, Einstein has the answer. Einstein said that you can't solve a problem from the same consciousness it was created within. That, again, the example that I just gave, it starts with every individual person. You must free up yourself from your own suffering and your own trauma, and to clean out your thinking, and to be able to have vision, and to be able to thrive, and to be able to be in, I think probably we're going to learn how to be in a meditative state nearly all the time pretty soon. And then from there, we can solve problems. But if we stay in the frequency of suffering, and we don't solve our own, and we don't have the solving of our own suffering spread, then we're just going to stay in the same. It's the same. Back to the double slit experiment. What we pay attention to is what materializes. So what are we paying attention to? Are we paying attention to the problem, or are we paying attention to the solution? Are we paying attention to how much we're controlled by things outside of us? Or are we paying attention to our sovereignty? What are we paying attention to? And it's we're building webs out here. It's power in numbers. It's dissemination of information. It's if you know something, tell us. It's if you've got some sort of codes as to what we're doing here, let us all know. Don't hoard it. If you know something, it's not for you to hoard. Who are you to hoard it? Tell us. And so I think that the times have met us here, that the opening of consciousness itself is happening no matter what. It doesn't matter if we wanted to or not. It's, are we going to resist it, or are we going to be in alignment with it? And I know where I'm going, but if you are in high resistance to the opening of consciousness, it will be difficult, very difficult. But if you ride it, if you lead with discovery, not fear, if you understand that you're adaptable and teachable, then those clusters start building more and more and more and more and more until we get to a critical mass. And that takes an enormous amount of trust in possibility and knowing that the beliefs we hold will dictate the world we live in. You have to trust that. I'm not asking anybody to have blind trust. There are mathematical markers. Our solar system is coming out of unconsciousness. Regulus marks the leadership of the world. As of 2012, at the end of the Mayan calendar, says that Regulus going into Virgo, the healing goddess energy, is now in charge of the planet for 2,000 years, and she is handing out chores, okay? We're cleaning it up. You can't make the opening of consciousness go backwards. It's happening no matter what. Okay, so we're the ones who make it difficult by being in resistance. If we can open up and not be afraid of the unknown, then this can happen a lot faster, but it is happening no matter what.
And that kind of goes back to Buddhism, where it's largely Buddhists contemplate and think about and write about and suffering and compassion, and how those two need to be entwined with each other to be in tune with other people.
Well, not only that, but suffering begins with your very thought, the thought that you harbor too. That's why I suggested earlier, when you go out into the world, be cognizant of the energy that you're taking out of your house, or certainly once you leave your car. Remember the energy that you're also putting into the world. And I had a near-death experience once in the French West Indies. I got caught in an undertow, and I just kept going down, down, down into the ocean. And I'm like, okay, at a certain point, there was just no resistance. And this light just enveloped me. And I was with the light for a while. And I'm like, to the light, what is the purpose of existence? And Susan, is said to alleviate suffering.
No. Oh.
And at that point, Susan, the ocean just spit me back up on this volcanic rock. I was all cut up and bloody, and I never felt more alive.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought up Buddhism. Thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. And honestly validating. Yay. Okay, we're on the right track. Buddhism talks about how suffering is an inevitable, necessary part of being alive. Okay. There is a Buddhist monk alive right now, and I don't have his name, so I need to go and find it, so I don't go around referring to an elusive Buddhist monk. But he's alive right now, and he is absolutely steadfast determined that we can end suffering in one lifetime. And to go and study under him is constant meditation. I mean, they meditate 16 hours a day on the floor, on wooden floors. So discomfort does not matter. And he went to everybody that studies under him are like, we can do this right now. And I think that's fascinating. I think it's fascinating that, like in my individual experience, I really fully am committed to, we're here to usher in the end of suffering. Now, if Buddhism itself is starting to say that at the same time, we're on to something. Okay? So, yeah, power in numbers.
Yeah.
Susan, so what does the rest of the year hold, in your opinion, for us air signs? Like any trends you've been seeing?
Yeah. And this is where my job gets challenging because I think people want to know, when does it all become wonderful? Okay. And it's not now. Okay. It's just not. It's not. There is in November um, a lot more to be delivered that looks like it's going to be intense and turbulent, but it's necessary too. Okay. So you're just like your reference to, nothing is happening to us, it's happening for us. So if you can let go of a tight grip of a story you're telling yourself about how things have to be, if you'll let go of that and let things unfold and play out, you'll be doing a lot better. Yeah. So November is more kind of shock and awe kind of stuff. Then we enter into a new paradigm. The 19th, we go into a Mercury retrograde. November 25th and December 6th, we go into a Mars retrograde. Now, I'm going to tell the two of you something, and I want you to know that I'm on your side, okay? But when Mars retrogrades, usually men run out of steam, like tend to go, oh, and you just can't. Okay, so that's December 6th through February 23rd. Okay, so I think if anybody's trying to push something out to make something happen, go ahead and do it in November, and then be patient and kind to yourself for several months as that Mars retrograde happens. Then it won't be fully out of the retrograde zone until like May. And then whenever we get to March, there's going to be a huge wave of Aries energy. So I think that through people's fear and impatience, there's probably conflict coming.
Probably.
Okay. But my stance on that is to be the observer. I keep telling people that to go into the work of the age of Aquarius, we're going to have to go through Libra. And Libra is coming from centeredness and balance and protecting peace and looking for flow. That's where you have to go through there to go into what looks like it's going to be turbulent for a couple, 3 years, maybe a little bit longer. I don't want a future trip too much because I don't want to freak people out. We have to be present in the current moment, okay? But if you can be the observer and come through centeredness and balance, then you'll be able to see that things are necessarily fracturing. We're shattering into wholeness. And if you can be okay with that, then you can make all kinds of things happen in here. But if you're in high resistance, then that, just like you were talking about, be aware of your energy whenever you go out into the world, sincerely. And if you feel like you can't hold the note of all is well and we do what we can, Libra, all is well, we do what we can. If you can't hold that note, you need to give yourself a timeout and recalibrate yourself. Very important about going out in the world. You're going to see rogue energy bouncing off of each other everywhere, but that's not for you to participate in. Helpful?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I don't know about you, Justin, but I mean, life is just much better when you get into the flow and you don't try to push anything. It's just, I mean, life really knows where you need to go. And, you know, usually the negativity stems from us being resistant to wherever it is that the universe wants us to go to.
Yeah. And as a creative, as a writer and director, and also somebody who struggles with bipolar disorder, I have to take the moments when they come, because creativity to me, while it's always there, it has to be fostered in a certain way. I can't just sit down and make myself write like a lot of writers can. You know, they'll set a 2-hour timer and write for 2 hours every day. My ideas come and go, and I believe that my creativity is largely meets resistance. And when those days come, I have to sit down and just pound out what I need to do. And that's something that's kind of plagued me over all the years of being a creative, but it's been maybe the past 15 years that I was able to tap into it and understand it. And I think that's different for everybody. I did have another question, Susan. For the most part, we kind of look at ourselves in 3 dimensions. And as a horror and sci-fi fanatic, we look at the 4th dimension quite a bit. And are there other dimensions out there that we can maybe tune into as well?
For sure. I mean, I don't know the latest science on it. I feel like I want to say there's 12 dimensions at least, I think. But I could be wrong on that. I don't know. Yes, of course. I mean, there's more to the naked eye in front of us than we can see. We can only see a small spectrum of the full scale of all of light. And so, yeah, there are multiple dimensions, and I think that probably there's a higher part of us that lives in multiple dimensions at the same time. And I think that they communicate and feed off of each other. I've felt it in the last week. I've been working a lot with Aquarian energy because we're all moving into it. And there's something about like I needed to do something to take care of myself, and I'm like, oh, I'll do it later. And I'm like, nope, you're going to do it now. Okay. And so I did it now. And then I could feel it. I could feel when I was putting my key in the door to go into my apartment that there was a parallel version of me that did not do that thing to take care of myself, and me that did, and we're existing at the same time. I could feel it right then. And I didn't touch it. I was just like, huh, that's interesting. And I kept going along the path of having done the thing to take care of myself. So I think that if you are getting into the opening of consciousness, you're going to need to get used to understanding that we exist beyond just this 3D. I think it's probably going to be unavoidable to know that quickly. And it's going to feel super weird. Does it feel weird to you?
Life is weird.
Yeah, especially when I was much younger, I felt called and compelled to meditate. I've always been in touch with my guides. I've had pre-birth memories, in fact. Long story short, so we got to wrap things up here. I was meditating in high school in the smoking area, and by golly, at that point, I was meditating twice a day, though, for probably about 12 months, maybe 13. One day in spring, peak experience hits. You're flooded with everything, past, present, future. Seems as though you know everything from like the point of God or source or whatever you want to call it. And it seemed to take forever, but I'm sure it was less than a nanosecond, in real time, whatever real time is. And the only thing I could do was just sit in the smoking area all day. Like, I didn't smoke, but I liked going out with my friends because, the black sheep were always the cooler people, right? You could talk to them about anything. And I literally could not do anything, but I sat there all day in awe. And I remember thinking, what's the point of going on now? Because I know everything. Past, present, and future, connected with the sources, the mind of source. But of course, to wrap it back up and bring it back down to the here and now is, no matter what knowledge we gain or what enlightenment that we think that we've contacted, the real work is when you come back down from the proverbial mountain and integrate all of that into daily life. Does it make us a better person? How does it affect our community? How does it affect our family? How does it affect us? And we like to think about all these lofty cosmic subjects and goals, and of course we all want to achieve enlightenment and peace and tranquility, whatever else that might mean to us individually. But the real work is coming back down and seeing trees for trees and people for people and the oneness of it all, and to maintain that reconciliation throughout almost every moment. That's where the true work is, and to keep that heart open while you're doing it, right? And if you can do that, or any modicum of that, with any amount of love, you've already won. You're ahead. You become the evidence, Susan. Become the light, Justin. That's all we have to do, really, is become the light is the evidence, right?
You will see that our overarching assignment eminently is going to be integration, to be able to integrate it fully into our incarnated selves. It's not something that's happening out there. It's happening right here in the breath, in the moment. That alone is going to become transcendent quicker.
And don't let anybody trigger you. That's the true test. And we're always going to be tested and have those pop quizzes. And if you fail and don't get it right, don't worry. There are more coming. Be rest.
Yeah.
Sure.
As we wrap this up, Susan, I have one more question that I wanted to ask you a few days ago, actually, but I was like, oh, you know what? I'll save it for the podcast. Your work is largely personal. And, if you look back throughout, history, for intuitives and psychics and the like, we think about them, sitting across from each other at a table and maybe doing a tarot reading or holding their hands or even looking through the crystal ball. But how are you able to personalize a reading when you're just talking with somebody on the phone or through a video conference? How are you able to get in tune with the other people, and what are the differences between sitting down with somebody and having physical contact or just being there? What's the difference between the two for you when you approach your work?
I don't need to physically be in the room. And I think that it's an energetic agreement of here's how it happens for me. You open the container and we're both in this container together and we're instantly connected. I personally cannot do readings without talking to people because because a chart is not a 3D, a chart is not just a 2D chart. You're talking to a human. So whenever I open the container, we have human exchange of energy. And for me, I don't know what it is. I'm able to open up and receive energy for this person. And lately, usually about an hour before I start talking to somebody in their readings, I start getting things about an hour before too. And I don't understand it until I'm talking to that person. So along the lines of quantum entanglement that we've been talking about, it's the agreement that this container is about this person and we both get in there together. And then I have a process of how I get into the chart, and I don't know why it happens this way, but whenever I'm in a chart, I'm in a chart. My full energy is in that chart and I'm feeling it out, and it's a living, breathing thing talking to me about who this person is or the moment that we're in collectively. So I think it's an agreement as to the quantum entanglement of what we're paying attention to, if that makes sense.
You just described remote viewing and non-locality.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Absolutely. So you would have made a great remote viewer. I'm surprised you haven't been approached for that yet.
Yeah, and I'm a double Scorpio, so I would keep whatever I found a secret.
Well, so alphabet agencies out there looking to increase your staff, visit Susan Gray.
And that definitely answered my question, because I was just curious on how you were able to, take that energy and use it, even though you're not in the same room. That's, that is definitely something that makes me less skeptical when you kind of look at it in that realm. Thank you for being here and sharing your life and talents with us. And one last time, let's kind of go over how people can contact you or find you and anything else you'd like to put out there.
Sure. Facebook and Instagram, Susan Grace. Be the Evidence.live is the member group that's an offshoot of the podcast Be the Evidence. And SusanGrace.org is where you can find me individually for one-on-ones. And then I'm going to have classes pretty soon. I'm in the final stages of getting those done. I've been working on them for a couple of years now, so those are almost ready.
And you truly are amazing. Your insight has been impeccable, as I've told you for about 15 now. I am blown away, Susan, by your insight and accuracy. I mean, you are truly gifted, and thank you for sharing those gifts with the rest of us.
I'll keep doing it.
We'd love to have you back on at some point. And I think what might make a really cool episode is if you did a reading with both of us. Are you able to do that with two people, or?
Oh, sure. Or we can do one episode with one of you and one with the other. We can do an episode of the two of you partnered together. We can do whatever. Sure.
Yeah, Barrett and I have, we're always telling each other, you're my brother. You're my brother from another mother, and we are so in tune, he and I together, that has drawn us closer and closer over the years. And so, he definitely feels like family to me. And so I think it would be really cool if we all sat down and we definitely did a reading for that.
Well, I just want to tell you, I've done one reading for a practitioner live on his podcast, and he agreed in advance that he was going to actually let me read, and I'm not going to filter it for an audience or whatever, but that would involve you trusting me that I always am looking for the highest octave of any chart. Okay, so I presume that you would trust me to go in there, but it sounds like fun. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I would be honored as well. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here with us for the past hour.
Justin and I have to run now. We're going down to the Albuquerque Potato Salad Festival and hang gliding event. And Justin, did you get the hang glider?
Not quite yet. I need to find some patches.
All right. Well, I'll be there in about 2 weeks.
So thanks again for being on here. You've been listening to the Barely Audible podcast with Justin and Bear. Come by again in 2 weeks, and we'll share another life and story with you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been fun.
It's been a pleasure.